It's a brand new week. Welcome to Business Morning. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago.
Thank you for joining us. I am BC at Debayo.
Well, Nigeria's gross domestic product grew by 2.55%. That's year on year in real terms in the fourth quarter of 2019 compared to the fourth quarter of 2018, which recorded a growth rate of 2.38%. This represents an increase of 0.17 percentage points and an increase of 0.27 percentage points when compared with the third quarter of 2019. Now, the strong fourth quarter 2019 growth rate also represented the highest quarterly growth performance since the 2016 recession. Overall, this resulted in annual 2019 real growth rate of 2.27% compared to 1.91% in 2018. Quarter on quarter, real GDP growth was 5.59%. In fourth quarter 2019, aggregate GDP stood at 39.58 trillion naira in nominal terms. This was higher than the fourth quarter of 2018, which recorded an aggregate of 35.23 trillion naira, representing year-on-year nominal growth rate of 12.34%. This rate was minus 0.31 percentage points lower relative to the rate recorded in the fourth quarter of 2018 and minus 0.96 percentage points lower than the rate recorded in the preceding quarter.
That's not all. Now, data released this morning by the National Bureau of Statistics shows that during the fourth quarter, average daily oil production of 2 million barrels per day was recorded, indicating a rise of 0.09 million barrels per day over the daily average production of 1.91 recorded in the same quarter of 2018. But it was lower than the production volume of 2.04 million barrels per day recorded in the third quarter of 2019. All the same, it's notable that oil production remained consistently at or above 2.0 million barrels per day all through 2019, and the real growth of this oil sector was 6.36% year-on-year in the fourth quarter of 2019. That, of course, shows an increase of 7.98% relative to the rate recorded in the corresponding quarter of 2018. Now, growth decreased by minus 0.13% compared to the third quarter of 2019, and the oil sector recorded a growth rate of 20.87% in Q4 2019. On an annual basis now, the oil recorded 4.59% growth in 2019, and that's higher compared to 0.97% we saw in 2018. The oil sector contributed 7.32% to total real GDP in the fourth quarter, up from the figures in the corresponding period of 2018, but it was down compared to the preceding quarter, where it contributed 7.06% and 9.77% respectively. Oil contributed 8.78% to real GDP in 2019.
All right, looking at the non-oil sector, that sector grew by 2.26% in real terms during the reference quarter. Now, this was lower by minus 0.44 percentage points compared to the rate recorded in the same quarter of 2018, but 0.42 percentage points higher than the third quarter of 2019. Now, this sector was driven during the fourth quarter of 2019, mainly by information and communication. That's telecommunications here. Agriculture, we're talking about agriculture, is crop production. We have the financial and insurance services, at the financial institutions, and of course, manufacturing. In real terms, the non-oil sector contributed 92.68% to the nation's GDP in the fourth quarter of 2019, lower from shares recorded in the fourth quarter of 2018, which was 92.94%, but higher than the third quarter of 2019, which was 90.23%. The annual contribution of non-oil sector stood at 91.22% in 2019. Well, I guess we will dwell more on these sectors during the course of the week. But let's get the first reaction on this from a development specialist, Dr. Ameh Kambou. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Kambou. Good morning. Well, good morning. If you can hear us, the NBS GDP report showed a growth of 2.27% in 2019 as against 1.91% in 2018. What's your assessment of this performance?
Well, you see, in part of your intro too, you also talked about the stability in oil production, and you find out that any time, you have, stability in the oil sector, oil production, especially when it's able to hit the 2 million barrel per day mark, it stabilizes the GDP. So I think that's a major driver, okay, for this growth that we're seeing. Secondly, you also look at the fiscal policies of government, which I think is quite impressive, quite commendable. I think it's also another addition. And then the third is, the focus on now infrastructure, and then you're building infrastructure based, on clear targets, okay, and from funding sources that are measurable, and funding sources, okay, that are timelined. So I think in all, as long as we have our oil production stable, we are going to be having our GDP growing. But that also has a flip side, if you ask me.
All right, so how can you relate these growth numbers with Nigeria's economic development?
That's what I'm saying. As far as I'm concerned, each time you see us get into, like the time we got into recession, what happened? The oil production dipped, oil prices dipped. When you have oil production stable and then you have oil prices, now we're oscillating between $59 to $70 per barrel, we will always be stable. But there were some other statistics that, and each time I talk about statistics coming from the MBS, yes, as much as we can rely on them, but I don't think they're as holistic as they should be, because the MBS, I do not, believe has that, capacity to be able to drill it down. Most of the statistics that they also generate are not generated from primary sources. That's also very important. And so when you are, doing a proper analysis on how this is impacting on the development of a country, I think it has to be a little bit more holistic. We need to be able to drive it down, to the subnational levels. This is where I think we might be able to be having some kind of a misunderstanding or disagreement, from my own perspective.
All right, Dr. Kambou, now, just last week, the IMF downgraded its growth forecast for Nigeria from 2.5% to 2%. The growth numbers we've seen now, are these numbers in line with the IMF's forecast?
Remember that IMF is an institution. Okay, what IMF relies on is actually, some factors that have to do with, mostly with your ease of doing business. This is why most of the times they say to you that most of reports coming from agencies like IMF are perceptions. You must also rely on your local, agencies, and this is where the MBS, calls to view. For me, yes, the IMF results should always be some kind of pointer, but I don't think IMF also has the capacity, just like I mentioned, the MBS, to be able to give a holistic picture. Because remember that Nigeria runs more of its economy from the informal sector. Has anybody been able to aggregate it? Have we been able to get our SBAs right? Okay, have we been able to get our SMEs properly captured, in when we're doing our growth analysis and all that? So I think the IMF figure, like I said to you, anytime you want to look at Nigeria's growth, or otherwise, just look at the oil price and production. You're able to predict it. And that's why I'm saying that if we're unfortunate and for whatever reasons we'll have issues with the oil production or oil sector or oil prices, then that is where our economy begins to shake.
All right, let's drill down those figures released today by the National Bureau of Statistics. Non-oil GDP was reported to account for 91.22% of the GDP in 2019. What does this tell us when we realize that the sector contributes about 50% to revenue and less than 20% to foreign exchange earnings? Shouldn't we be worried about this?
Again, like I said to you earlier, Chimezie, when you're talking about the non-oil contributions, you mentioned crops. Okay, where do we get the statistics from? Are they from secondary or primary sources? Okay, where are these sources of these crops, or oil or non-oil? You also mentioned, I think, the solid mineral sector. Where do we have these mines that are producing these things? So I think, for me, without also, recognizing the importance of the job of MBS, I think what we need to do is to look at these things as what they are, perceptions, okay? Extrapolations, if you may. We need to get a little bit more holistic, like you use the word drilling down. Where are we getting our data from? Is it from primary sources? Are you getting it from farm gates? Are you getting it from the mouth of mines? You know, so these are for me the issues. So I'm not very excited at these releases. Okay, it doesn't scare or impress me, but it can just be what it is, a guide. You know, for us to know that yes, you know, we are actually on some right path. But like I said, and I keep insisting, anytime you see our numbers shaking, go and look at the oil sector. And it being a primary revenue source, it's actually where I think we have a worry as a country. We must be able to not only diversify vis-a-vis pronouncements, we must be diversified in real terms. Okay, so that when you're talking about real contributions to GDP, you're able to get the statistics, you know, from the proper and right sources at primary levels.
Now, one key word you've mentioned is holistic. Now, what holistic measures would you actually recommend for us to be able to get the actual figures that you've been talking about?
We start our data generation from the lowest cadre, which is where you have your CDAs or your community. So MBS should be able to have at least one office in each of the 774 local governments of Nigeria. That is when you can begin to now, you know, generate, you know, data from what you might be able to call, you know, your primary sources. That's very important. And I don't think, you know, that is what it is we have right now. You know, MBS should be able to generate data on a real-time basis, which means that you must be able to now either get this data, you know, from farm gates or get it from storages. That's actually when you're able to now know what your real GDP is, okay, for both the non-oil sector. And remember, again, you mentioned the services sector. Okay, it's easy. Telecoms. You know, with the amount of telecom users in Nigeria and then what it is people are spending, you know, to be able to use the service, it's easy for us to be able to, you know, calculate what contributions that can make. So if we are going to be getting this thing to be holistic and then you are bounding figures that we can actually interrogate, I think we need to drill down the operations of AMBS and make sure that it goes down to, you know, that real sector level to where, you know, the action actually is.
Another angle to that report. Now, would you say that the border closure and security issues had affected the GDP outcome?
Yes, I would say so to a very large extent. Again, it's the land border, but also remember that what you've just closed is maybe less than 10% of what passes through our borders, you know, because these land borders that you've closed, less than 10% of our imports come through the land borders. But I think it's been able to engender some kind of a national consciousness that we need to be able to do things ourselves. But I don't think it should be permanent, okay? Border closure, yes, it's okay, but remember, you cannot shut out, you could close your borders for whatever reasons, but it's important you don't shut out your neighbors. Okay, but what the border closure has actually shown is that we are a large market. Goods from Nigeria or goods coming into Nigeria mostly come from these sources, you know, that we don't know or we have found out, and we now have the capacity to begin to also grow our economy locally. So I think yes, the border closure, like government has said, has slowed down, if you may, insurrections and insurgencies, but he hasn't stopped it. Okay, he can't stop it because, I mean, if you don't have a gate, you're going to be locking and nobody can come in. Remember that these are land borders that stretch, you know, for thousands of kilometers endlessly, and you don't have the technology, nor do we have the manpower to be able to man it effectively. But I think to a very large extent, it's done some good, you know. I support the land border closure, but I do not support shutting out our neighbors.
All right, Dr. Okengwu, if I would, looking at what you have said so far, I don't know, would I be right if I say that you are of the belief that the GDP growth cannot be described as inclusive?
Yes, that's it, exactly.
So what do we need to...
It is not inclusive, it's not even can be described, it's not inclusive at all.
So what do we need to do to make the GDP growth impact on the citizens?
Unfortunately, I've lost you. I can't hear you anymore.
What do we need to do to have these growth numbers impactful on the citizens?
What is very clear, Chimezie, is for you to know that there are 4 levels of governance. Okay? At the subnational levels, you have 3 levels down, from the CDA to the local governments and then to the state governments, and then you have a national government. But I think what we've done is that we've focused a lot of our analysis on the activities of the federal government. Now, it's important that we must bring everybody to some table to be able to now juxtapose actions, juxtapose plans, juxtapose programs. When you're talking about agriculture, you're talking about crop production. Federal government does not own as much land to be able to do the kind of cropping that will be able to give you the numbers you mentioned. Even at that, when you even get down to the state level, like I just mentioned in an earlier program I was in, these lands belong to communities. So you must be able to get, those communities into, getting into the same sync with you. If we're going to be developing, and to this extent, what I'll be promoting will be for us to be able to now, develop what we call our national volumes, our national outputs, vis-a-vis, our population, vis-a-vis our nutrition needs. Okay, vis-a-vis our carrying capacities. And then we begin to now introduce our technologies. And this is where I think that we should stop looking at agriculture, as the major, driver of growth and look at technology. Okay, the moment we're able to take, agriculture, and then we're no longer talking agriculture, we'll now start talking food production, okay, as a stream. We'll start talking maybe what you call your agroforestry. Okay, they'll be able to give you your cash crop as another stream. You start talking about your medicinal plants as another stream. Okay, you begin to now, talk about probably building belts, not only plantations, because nobody talks about plantations anymore. People have gone beyond plantations and we're talking about belts. And this is where you can actually begin to now develop what you call your common shared infrastructure, along, these belts that now, are not hindered by what you might be able to call state or local government, borders or boundaries. This is what we need to do. We must be able to create a whole, if we are going to be creating the wheat belt, to how many states can it be able to crisscross? What infrastructure will we be needing to support it? Who and who we need to be on that table? The moment we align, what we now call this nationally determined outputs or outcomes, okay, it must start from the CDAs, the Community Development Associations, and then goes all the way, to the local governments, goes all the way to the state governments, and then we now align it with the policies and the programs and actions of the federal government. Then we'll be talking about, everybody will be singing one language. Okay, if we're talking cowpea, we'll probably be saying that out of 8 states or 12 states or 13 states of Nigeria, X amount of cowpea is going to be produced using X amount of common shared infrastructure, using X amount of land, using X amount of human capital, and then with this kind of fund injection. That is the way we can be able to get our country, to actually now have what you call, a real GDP growth that is inclusive.
Now, what about the monetary, forex, and fiscal policies? What role do they play in the GDP performance?
If you don't align them, they remain what they are, policies. What's a policy? A policy is a thought line. Okay, what your policy is this is what I intend to do, this is how I intend to do it. Now, if you do not have the program and action component of that policy, it becomes what it remains what it is, talk or paperwork. Okay, you must be able to, walk the talk, and in walking the talk of policy will be to be able to now add, to that component of program, add to that component of action. This is where all these things I've tried to describe earlier comes into being. And if you're talking policy at the federal level and you're not tying, the man who owns 1 hectare, an acre, of land into it, and he's not, in sync with your vision, then all you're going to be doing is to be doing what the MBS is doing now. Probably be giving you figures that you might not be able to, actually interrogate, empirically. And that might be the challenge it will pose if we're not tying everybody onto the same pump string.
All right, Dr. Kambou, just before we let you go, a quick word. Now, the IMF in its Article 4 consultation report recently noted that major policy adjustments remain necessary to contain short-term vulnerability, build resilience, and of course, unlock growth potential. What kind of policy stimulus do you think we need to put in place to boost GDP performance? And how do you think the NBS can be empowered to actually churn out those figures you can relate to everyday life?
Fortunately, one of the major borrowing streams, in the new borrowing plan is actually to get money to strengthen the MBS. Okay, so government recognizes that the MBS needs to be, strengthened. Like I also said, Nigeria is one country, but we now operate at 4 different levels. Okay, if you may. So you must be able to understand that what the federal government, does, and what federal government, well, if you look at the concurrent exclusive lists, you must be able to realign, both the concurrent and exclusive lists to be able to carry everybody along. And that's when I use the word social inclusion. Everybody must be inclusive. And being inclusive means that you must be able to tie this thing. And this is where I think that the most important ministry thus far in this, changing of our focus will be the Ministry of Science and Technology. Okay, because their actions, their outputs, crisscrosses across every other sector. The moment we're able to have, our science and technology being driven, okay, by innovation,
All right.
then you're no longer talking agriculture like I mentioned earlier. You now begin to talk food production. Okay, you now begin to talk medicinal plants production. You now begin to talk self-sufficiency in even your agroforestry et al. You now begin to talk about your aquatic production. For instance, we have over 300 dams in Nigeria. How many of them are producing fish?
Dr.
Yet we
Kambou.
have over 10 million.
Well, Dr. Kambou, we just have to leave this conversation here. It's an ongoing conversation, I'm sure. During the course of the week, we have quite a lot to talk about this GDP number. Thank you for your time, Dr. Ameh Kambou. He is a development specialist. We'll take a quick break now and still talking the growth numbers, looking at how investors will be trading the figures. That's when we come back. To stay with us.